Hello everybody. I'm about to post a study guide, but before I do that, I want to go over certain ways that we can roughly break down the original 13 colonies before we actually get into that early American history. The reason that we do this is because these rough groups of colonies, the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies, they actually do share some statistically relevant traits. Example off the top of my head, I would imagine that most of the New England colonies are founded based off of some movement towards religious freedom from England, but still some type of kind of overly doctrinal, dogmatic, telling people what to do way with the way that the Puritans do things. The Atlantic colonies, the New England colonies, also a lot of their economy is based off of port trade, fishing, just having to do with being a coastal state, having to do with the ocean, right? We still picture New England states to have a lot to do with fishing. We'll see that here in the breakdown of New England colonies. The Middle colonies, we'll see. We'll see when I break them down, right? So let's start with those New England colonies. Massachusetts, I made my cursor too big. If you just look at the top bar of my cursor, that's what I'm pointing at, that top horizontal bar of my cursor. Massachusetts, right here. Connecticut, right here. Rhode Island, the small little dot in between them. New Hampshire, just above it. Maine's not really in the picture yet, even though it's shown on the map. So climate, it's cold, it's rocky. Climate and geography, it's cold, it's rocky. Soil is pretty fertile, but the rest of the weather conditions make agriculture pretty tough to maintain. Cold winters do reduce the spread of disease, though. So the New England colonies, as I mentioned, dominated by Puritans seeking to purify Christianity. We've been going over the Protestant Reformation and its impacts on the settlement of the Plymouth colony, so that we understand religious freedom on a little bit of a deeper level. As I've mentioned before, those kinds of people making moves around the Protestant Reformation is going to characterize the religion of the entire New England region. We'll see that a little bit with Rhode Island, and we'll see that a little bit with Rhode Island in the future in particular. Their economy largely depend on the ocean, like I said. Fishing, trading, whaling, trapping, shipbuilding, logging. The lumber industry is very big in New England. Cold weather doesn't exclude your ability to grow trees, so that's good for their logging and shipbuilding, for the logging and shipbuilding aspect of their economy. New England is also going to be a major port town for the slave trade in the future, because slave trade is going to substantiate the southern colonies' plantation system, but the New England colonies are going to want a piece of that economic pie, so to speak. And since they're the major trade ports, we'll see how that works in the future. The Middle colonies, much more temperate climate, much more laid-back approach to religious freedom, and much more religiously diverse region. The Middle colonies are here. New York, top bar of my cursor, remember, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware. Geography, again, very temperate, ranges from coastal plains along the coast, Piedmont rolling hills in the middle, mountains further inland. Very similar to the North Carolina geography in that aspect. The Appalachian Mountains do run all the way up this eastern side of the United States, of the current United States. The area also has good coastal harbors, but it's also well suited for growing grains. A lot of wheat and oats are grown in the Atlantic states. That's why it's known as the breadbasket. Like I said, very diverse religiously. Quakers, Catholics, Jews, Lutherans, Presbyterians. They all have a pretty they're not limited in any major way from practicing their own diverse ideas of what religion looks like in the Atlantic states. Middle colonies, a successful and diverse economy. The New England economies force you to urbanize in a very significant way, since trade trade kind of has to move through cities. Trade kind of has to move through a dense population. We will kind of see that in the Atlantic states as well, but because they are better suited for a more diverse agriculture, the Atlantic states can also be a little bit more rural than the New England states have. The New England states have to be. But we still have major cities in the Atlantic. We still have New York and Philadelphia, right? That's good. We also have craftsmen such as blacksmiths, silversmiths, cobblers, wheelwrights, wig makers, milliners, and others. So that's fun. Southern colonies. Maryland, top bar of my cursor right up here. Virginia, all this. North, South Carolina, Georgia, right? Southern colonies, warm climate, hot summers, mild winters. The hot climate does make disease spread a little bit easier. Germs like it hot. Geography ranged from coastal plains in the east to Piedmont farther inland. The westernmost regions were mountainous. The soil was perfect for farming, and growing season was longer than in any other region. Remember that the growing season is longer here because it's warmer. There's less permafrost. The soil does not stay frozen for quite as long in the south as it does in the north. Remember that. That could come up Friday. Religion. Most people in the southern colonies were Anglican, which means, again, remember the Anglican Church, but this is a New World specific type of Anglican religion. We have Baptists and Presbyterians. Most of the original settlers of the Maryland colony were Catholic, English Catholics, as Lord Baltimore founded it as a refuge for English Catholics. Religion did not have the same impact on, and if you recall, an English Catholic means that you are a person in England whose major religious figure is still the Pope in the Papal States in Rome, right? Religion did not have the same impact as it did in the New England colonies or the Mid-Atlantic colonies because people lived on plantations. Remember that I was de-stressing the significance of religious freedom for the settlement of Jamestown for a reason, and that's because the major motivating factor for settling Jamestown, for settling the Virginia territories, was the profits of the Virginia Company, making sure that the Virginia Company could turn a profit so that their mercantile investors were satisfied with the venture, right? Yes, and it develops a rural characteristic because the large plantations spread out the population. If you want to have your own plantation, then that means you really don't have any neighbors aside from the laborers and the slaves that are working underneath you. Southern economy, cash crop economy. Indigo, tobacco, sugarcane, cotton, all great cash crops. Sugarcane is kind of a subsistence crop, but not really, since you can't subside on sugar, you know. A lot of grains can hold you over for a long period of time. You can't just eat sugar and live for very long. Crops were grown on large plantations where slaves and indentured servants worked. Charleston, South Carolina became one of the centers of the American slave trade in the 1700s. That's going to be a significant piece of information for you to know. That the New England colonies, they're bringing in slaves just because of how large those ports are, how much traffic goes through those ports. But Charleston is also going to get a significant amount of direct shipments of slaves, being an important coastal town in the southern colonies. This map gives you a decent idea of the early ethnography of early colonial settlement. You could just look over this at your leisure. This isn't going to be a significant factor for Friday's test. This could help you out. Please look over this chart. This chart is very helpful. It does kind of overgeneralize things, but things like the major economic activities, knowing this stuff is very good. The religious groups, knowing this stuff is very good. I don't foresee this being a factor on Friday's exam, but I do foresee this being a factor for Unit 2, so make sure that you do understand this to some degree. The religious character of the New England, Middle, and Southern colonies, and how they're different from each other. Types of local government, you should also be looking at that. I do want you guys to have some kind of idea of the development of government. When you see town meetings could speak out, vote high degree of self-government for the New England colonies, you should picture the Mayflower Compact. You should picture that initial written agreement for self-government, and you should picture people going to town meetings and having collective agreements on what government in localities looks like. When you look at the southern colonies, when you see counties where basic units, sheriffs, and justice of the peace appointed by governor, I want you to remember the Lords Proprietor stuff. I want you to remember that the Lords Proprietors were still in England appointing governors from across the Atlantic to carry out their idea of what government should look like and to maintain their personal interests. So those governors can be a little bit not as reflective of what people in the area think. Those governors are often operating under the best interests of the people who are across the Atlantic in England. And then those sheriffs are basically stretching out from the governors, so the arms of the governors, right? Okay, that's all the stuff that I wanted to go over with you before we meet on Thursday, before we go over the study guide. Look over the study guide now, especially when I post the study guide. Let me just pull it up. So the first chunk of the study guide we're going to go over in class on Thursday. These multiple choice questions, we're going to go over all of this content on Thursday. But this stuff, I want you guys to start to look at now and to fill out as much of this stuff now as possible. I know this looks like a lot, but we should already have a decent amount of this pre-existing in the back of our heads, right? We should have an idea of what Puritans look like and what a proprietary colony is and who the Pilgrims were. So go over your notes. Go over the old PowerPoints. Everything is posted. If you don't know where anything is, please let me know as soon as possible, and I will see you guys soon.